It's Friday, July 11th, 2025, and we have a large risk of severe weather stretching all the way from the southern to northern plains, with an increased risk of severe storms highlighted by a slight risk in a corridor which stretches from the northeastern corner of Kansas all the way up into the Great Lakes region. And then we have another pretty conditional marginal risk of severe weather out here in the eastern United States. This threat of severe weather is going to be mostly fueled by the threat of some severe winds. In both of our 5% risk areas, we could see anywhere over 60-mile-an-hour gusts, and especially out here in the upper southern plains, there is actually a higher probability of seeing some gusts exceeding 65 miles an hour. Then we have an increased risk corridor right here, which stretches all the way from the northeastern corner of Kansas all the way up into the Great Lakes region, where some gusts exceeding 70 miles an hour could be possible. Our hail risk is also going to be pretty small at only a 5% chance of hail, but it also stretches from our southern plains upper convergence zone all the way up into the northern plains, and that corridor stretching all the way through Kansas, through the Great Lakes region, where we could really see anywhere between hail half an inch in diameter and all the way up to an inch in diameter today. And there is also going to be a fairly conditional risk of tornadoes today, and that's also going to be in that corridor stretching from northeastern Kansas all the way up into the Great Lakes region, and this could possibly entail a weak spin-up tornado anywhere in this risk area. For our flood risk today, it's going to be mostly focused on that eastern Kansas all the way up to Midwest and Great Lakes region corridor, where there is going to be a slight risk, so anywhere within this, there could be swaths in between 3 to 4 inches of rain. Then we have a large marginal risk which spans pretty much the entire Great Plains, then all the way up into the Great Lakes region. In this, we could see anywhere between 1 to 2 inches of rain. And the same goes for our marginal out here, which spans from the southeast all the way up into New England. Here's a more visual look on where that rainfall exactly is going to be today. And we can see stretching all the way between eastern Kansas through the Midwest, then eventually up to Great Michigan. We see an area of the increased probability of high rainfalls with a lot of swaths exceeding 2 inches of rain, really being anywhere between 2 to 4 inches. And for our temperatures across the U.S., we're going to see a pretty big cool down up here in the northern plains associated with some troughing pushing into the U.S. And out here east of the plains, we're going to see that trend of pretty normal temperatures continue to persist. That's going to be anywhere from the mid 80s to low 90s, with a little increased area down here in the southeast, which could see some mid 90s temps down there. And then out here in our southern Great Plains, we're going to continue to see some really hot temperatures anywhere between the low to high 90s. But actually, believe it or not, that's pretty normal for this region this time of year. So nothing crazy out there. And then we're going to continue to see above average temperatures out west with an increased area south of the Pacific Northwest. Here's our simulated reflectivity from our main risk area of severe weather today out here in the Midwest. And we're going to see the ingredients are going to start to get laid early this morning today. This weather system right here is going to leave a outflow boundary, which is going to be pretty instrumental for the strengthening of storms right out here in our main corridor. And also back here, we're going to see a mesoscale convective vortex, which is going to push northeast, then eventually east, and we see some redevelopment along it when the low-level jet kicks up in the morning, which could possibly bring a couple of strong storms, but nothing really crazy. And then there's also going to be a secondary low, a little bit more south, situated in parts of northern Missouri. And right around the early afternoon, we're going to start to see intensification of our storms. That's going to be associated with this low pressure system, some troughing moving through the region, a secondary low pressure system, and then some frontal activity along this boundary. Then our main corridor up here is going to be pushing through the Wisconsin-Iowa border and eventually into Chicago and Lake Michigan. And at this point, there's going to be the threat for some hail, possibly 1 inch in diameter, some strong winds, possibly nearing that 70-mile-an-hour gust range, and then also the conditional threat for a couple of spin-up tornadoes. And after the initial state where these storms were a bit more discrete, they're going to congeal into that line like we're used to seeing, and they're going to push through Chicago in about the sunset hours, and then they will eventually move into Michigan before they die off Friday night. Here's our simulated reflectivity from our upper plains convergence zone, and immediately we're going to see some troughing extending all the way down from the northern United States, which could possibly intensify a cluster up here in northeastern Colorado. And then along our high plains convergence zone right about here, we're going to start to see storm development around midday to early afternoon. And these storms could bring some strong severe gusts in excess of 60 to 65 miles an hour. And then along our troughing brought by the storms that we just talked about in the Midwest, or actually frontal activity, we could see another increased area of intensity down here in eastern New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle. That's also going to bring that threat for some severe winds and possibly hail. I also forgot to mention that this cluster up here in northeastern Colorado could also possibly pose that conditional hail risk as well. Moving down to the Central Plains, once again, this is just going to be a better look at our cluster storms up here in the Texas Panhandle, and mostly it's just going to be a cluster bringing some wind to the Amarillo, Texas area, and then there's also the conditional threat for really anywhere along the New Mexico-Texas border for some strong storms as well. And then these are going to be mostly done bringing that threat by midnight tonight, and then they'll actually start bringing that threat around the evening hours today as well. Our second to last area of interest is actually going to be up here in the Northern Plains. Once again, we've been seeing a lot of activity in the Northern Plains, and what there's actually going to be a bit of a front left behind, which is going to drape down pretty far all the way into northeastern Colorado, like we talked about. Now there's going to be some storms associated with a trough moving through, and when that trough interacts with that front, we could see a couple of discrete storms possibly fire up right here, and this is going to be a little before midday. These storms would pose a mostly wind and hail threat, possibly bringing some large hail with their discrete nature before they turn into that cluster and then die off along the mid-afternoon hours. And along that front drape down, we could see some isolated severe storms pretty much anywhere along that front all the way through the afternoon. And our last area of interest is going to be out here, out east, and it's going to be for a cluster of storms, or the threat of some conditional clustering of storms along some frontal activity out here, and it's just going to be a moist and modestly unstable air mass initiated by peak heating and some weak troughing moving through the area. Here are 500 millibar winds, and we can immediately see two areas of interest, one up here in the Northern Plains and another one in the Midwest, our main risk area. And this trough down here in the Midwest, or shortwave, is actually going to help to initiate our storms in the afternoon. And the same thing is going to go for our trough up here in the Northern Plains, which actually ejects quite a bit earlier, and is one of the reasons why we're expecting to see that earlier initiation of storms before midday up there. And there's going to be a high pressure system back here in the southwest, which could bring some more organizing shear to our wind clusters back here in our upper plains convergence zone. And there's just going to be a lot of favorably westerly flow across the region, and possibly a small shortwave moving through our eastern risk area as well. And that's going to also be conducive for some storm formation. Another thing to note is these are 700 millibar winds, and we see a big area of 700 millibar winds pushing through our main risk area out here in the Midwest, and that could increase that threat for really all hazards of severe weather, but especially that tornado threat, although it's still expected to be mostly for a couple of weak spin-up tornadoes. Here's a weather sounding from our main risk area, and immediately we see a pretty large curve in our photograph, which would indicate that a tornado threat is present. We see some veering in our winds, which indicates some storm organization. Our low-level helicity is going to be over 100, and our low-level shear is going to be above that 20-knot threshold, so definitely a favorably sheared environment for tornadoes out here in just general storms. Then our bulk shear is going to be nearing that 30-knot threshold, so some storms possibly struggling to get organized, although there could be some more organization with that wind veering, and because that jet max from that shortwave is going to be right above our lowest cloud level, would also be enough to support a conditional tornado threat. We have a decent bit of cape up here near our freezing level, and then mid-level rhapsodies, which would be enough to support a threat of some small hail anywhere between quarter size and possibly all the way up to an inch in diameter. We see some dry air aloft, which could support that threat of severe winds, and just a moist environment in a very unstable environment at around 4,000 cape, so very favorable for severe storms. So precipitable water is going to be high at 1.81 inches. Our downdraft cape is going to be 1,000, and our 3 cape is going to be 210. So all things that would support that threat of severe weather, then our 3 cape being 210 could increase the threat of tornadoes and possibly some hail out here as well in the Midwest. Here's a weather sounding from where we think that storm cluster is going to be in the Texas Panhandle. We see a pretty straight photograph with some organizing winds at around 30 knots, but this storm is mostly expected to be linear. And we see high LCLs, which would be indicative of a almost entirely wind and hail threat. We have a decent bit of cape up here near our freezing level, and our mid-level lapse rates are going to be 8 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, so possibly some hail for these storms, although it's expected to be mostly a linear cluster, so that would hinder that threat. We see some dry air aloft, which would support a threat of strong severe winds. We also see a modestly moist environment, which will be enough for areas of higher altitude up in that upper plains convergence zone. We see a modestly unstable environment at around 2,000 Cape. Our precipitable R is going to be 1.19. Our downdraft Cape is going to be 1,600. Our relative humidity is going to be around 50%. So that's all things that would support that threat of severe winds. And then also a hail risk could be out here in eastern New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle. So possibly some severe winds in excess of 65 miles an hour and then some hail at around 1/2 inch in diameter. And this is sounding a bit more north in Colorado. And we again see that straight photograph. So very similar stuff here. The only difference is that we're going to see a environment with a lot less Cape, less moisture, but this would be at a higher altitude, so it wouldn't really matter. A little bit more wind veering and a little bit more organizational shear at 32 knots, so possibly some more organized storms, which last for a little longer. A downdraft Cape is also going to be lower. Our precipitable R is going to be lower, and our relative humidity is going to be about the same. So pretty much the same environment that we saw in the Texas Panhandle up here that would pose pretty much the same threats. Here is a weather sounding from our northern plains risk area, and our photograph doesn't really look that special. Our low level shear is going to be very lackluster, but our bulk shear could be increased, so possibly the threat of some organized storms. We see a lack of wind veering, which could possibly hinder that threat, but we do see a decent bit of Cape up here near our freezing level. Then our mid-level lapse rates are going to be 8.2 Celsius decrease per kilometer, so possibly some hail at around 1 inch in diameter. Up here, we see a very moist environment and a very unstable environment at around 4,000 joules per kilogram of Cape. So absolutely some strong severe storms up here today in the northern plains. Our precipitable R is going to be 1.63 inches and a downdraft Cape nearing 1,000. Then our 3 Cape is also going to be 91. So things that would point towards some hail and windstorms with winds gusting at around that 60 mile an hour range, and then some hail possibly at around 1 inch in diameter up here in the northern plains. And our last risk area is going to be out here in the eastern U.S. And there's not really much to talk about. It's just going to be a very moist environment with a 72 dew point and a modestly unstable environment at around 2,500 Cape with a high precipitable water and a decent downdraft Cape at 1,000 and then a decent 3 Cape at 100. That's actually a pretty good 3 Cape. So definitely some severe storms out here in the eastern U.S., bringing that wind threat of around 60 mile an hour gust.